Hi, yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Maddie Mahoney. I'm an occupational therapist in the Westfield, Indiana location.
And I'm Molly Mitchell. I'm the occupational therapist in the Needham, Massachusetts location.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start it off. We're going to be talking about sensory regulation and sensory-based strategies tonight. Feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we'll get started. So the objectives of our presentation are to identify the 8 sensory systems, and then we are going to try and understand just the general process of sensory regulation and understand the different types of sensory responses related to each sensory system. We're going to look at different strategies that we can use to help promote effective sensory regulation and hopefully give you guys a good list of sensory-based activities that you can do with your child at home or out in different environments. So just to start off, briefly touch on what is occupational therapy. So basically, occupational therapy is just helping people return to what they want or need to do so that they can perform meaningful occupations. And an occupation is really anything that occupies a person's time. So it can be things that people need to do, want to do, or expected to do. And so with the clients that we work with and with your kids, play is the most important occupation. A kid is really, that's just their biggest occupation to focus on, and you can learn a lot through play. But other occupations that Molly or I might practice in different settings or even still in ABA could be things like social participation, work, dressing, bathing, home management, shopping, leisure, all of these types of things. So these are the 8 sensory systems, and I'm sure most of you have heard of the first 5, which are touch, sight, smell, taste, and hearing. But there are actually 8 senses, and 3 of them we consider the hidden senses, mostly because we don't learn about them in school unless maybe you go to OT school. And these 3 other senses are interoception, vestibular, and proprioceptive. So we are going to kind of go through all 8, give you guys some examples and activities, and break it down further later in the presentation. Okay, so we had a little issue with sound, and I don't think the sound is going to work. I'll play it. Molly, you let me know if you can hear it, but if not,
Okay.
I will just kind of explain what it is. Can you hear it?
Did someone say they can hear it? Because I don't think I can hear it.
No. Okay.
Okay.
So I will pause it. But we will send the video after the presentation so you guys can watch the YouTube video. But it's a video of a boy who has autism, and he's walking through the store with his mom, and he experiences a lot of sensory stimulation. So he's getting, the noises from people walking and their bags rattling. He is, seeing the different flashes from the photos, and he smells the perfume from the perfume center. So it's a lot of sensory stimulation that he's receiving. I mean, it's a lot of small things that he's noticing that, say, for example, I was walking in the mall, my brain might just ignore half of what is going on, and be able to process that just fine and say, hey, I don't need to register everything that's going on. It's not important to me. But because autistic brains work differently, he's processing all of that information, and it's really overstimulating for him. And in the video, he uses some coping strategies such as counting to 10 to help him calm down and self-regulate. But at the end of the video, you'll see that he is just really overstimulated, and it's too much information that he's processing. And that's okay. So he maybe later in the video would go take a break in a quiet area, self-regulate and relax, and then could continue on in the mall. But you guys can take a look at this video when we send it out. And, if you have any questions or anything, you can reach out to us and we'll explain more detail. But it's a really great video, so I definitely recommend watching. Okay. So moving on, these are some diagnoses that have sensory processing difficulties. So this may include autism, which is what we're going to focus on. But there are a lot of different diagnoses that can have sensory processing difficulties as well. For example, maybe you've had a concussion, and this could, with a concussion, your brain has a bruise, and you may be really sensitive to light and that visual input. So you could, be really sensitive to watching TV or looking at the computer screen, and you might want the lights dim. So that's just an example of that sensory, kind of overload and disruption due to that concussion. So we're going to focus on autism, but there's a lot of different diagnoses that can experience this sensory difficulties as well.
Quick question. Is the name of the video, can you make it to the end?
I actually
Totally
don't
okay if you don't know.
know.
Somebody had brought it up. I just thought I'd ask, but I'll send out the links after this is over.
I
Okay,
just did
yeah.
a quick Google search and it is. If you just Google YouTube, can you make it to the end? It's the first video that pops up and it's a little boy in a blue sweatshirt.
I'll grab it and I'll put it in the chat for everybody too.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's perfect. Yeah, I did not know that was the name, but thanks for checking on that. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to talk about just the general sensory regulation process. So basically we start with that sensory input and your sensory receptors are stimulated. So an example of this would be you hear music and those vibrations hit your eardrum, and then your brain processes whatever that information is. So your brain will process that information, it organizes it, interprets it, and then it can relate it to your past experiences. So in this example, you hear that music and you realize, oh, this is my favorite song. So then you go into the response, and a physical response is created based on the sensory input. So in this example, we are enjoying the song and starting to sing along because we realize, hey, this is my favorite song. We could change this example and say you heard your least favorite song. Maybe your response would have been different. Maybe you would have skipped the song, turned down the music, or left the room because you didn't want to listen to it. So your responses can change based on that sensory input and that past experience. Okay, and then Molly is going to take it away with sensory responses.
Okay, so now we're just going to talk about the different ways that individuals respond to sensory input. So this is a visual that organizes the different types of responses to sensory input. So we all respond in different ways to different sensory input, and there are four main categories of responses, including low registration, sensory seeking, sensory sensitivity, and sensory avoiding. And so individuals may fall in one category for one type of sensory input and another category for another type of sensory input. So for example, a child might be sensory seeking for vestibular input and enjoy climbing and jumping activities, but they might be sensory avoiding for auditory input and cover their ears when they hear loud noises. This visual also categorizes responses based on the threshold and the type of self-regulation. So you see at the top, hyposensitivity is when an individual has a high threshold for sensory input. And so low registration is the passive response to having a high threshold, and sensory seeking is the active response to having a high threshold. Hypersensitivity at the bottom is when an individual has a low threshold for sensory input. And so sensory sensitivity is the passive response to having a low threshold, and sensory avoiding is the active response to having a high or a low threshold. And so now on the next few slides, I'm going to explain each of the types of responses in a little more detail. So the first one I'll talk about is low registration. So as I previously mentioned, low registration is the passive response to having a high threshold for sensory input, also known as hyposensitivity. Low registration is when a child has difficulty recognizing sensory input. For example, a child might have low auditory registration and they might not respond when you say their name. So low registration is considered the passive response because that child's not ignoring you or ignoring sensory input on purpose. They just don't register it or recognize it. And so then they're not actively looking for increased sensory input in order to register that information. So in order for a child with low registration to recognize sensory input, they require an increased amount of sensory input. So for example, a child who didn't register you saying their name, they might just need you to use a louder voice. So when when a child has low registration, they might also appear disinterested or tired. They might need extra time to process information, and they might have some difficulty attending to work or an activity. So the next
I have
response
a
is
quick question, Molly. I
Sure.
apologize for interrupting. I had a question come in. Can sensory avoiding mean with touch? I hope I'm saying that right, Wendy.
Yes. So, and we'll talk about sensory avoiding on the next slide, actually. But yes, sensory avoiding can mean with touch. And when we get to the next slide, I'll get more into it if that's okay, just so that we don't skip around. So right now, this slide is talking about sensory seeking. So sensory seeking is the active response to having a high threshold for sensory input. This is when a child is actively seeking out sensory opportunities in order to meet their needs, to register and recognize sensory input. For example, a child might have a high threshold for proprioceptive input, and they might actively seek out opportunities to gain that input, including stomping on the ground, wearing a weighted vest, pushing down on crayons with increased force, or anything like that. Children with sensory seeking behaviors might also take climbing risks. They might have difficulty sitting still. They might fidget, or they might frequently touch objects or people more than their same aged peers. Okay, now we'll get into the sensory sensitivity and sensory avoiding. So there is a difference, even though they are on the same slide. Sensory sensitivity is the passive response to having a low threshold for sensory input. For example, a child might be sensitive to tactile input or touch input and become very frustrated when getting their hands messy. However, they won't actively avoid getting messy to prevent becoming upset. So children with sensory sensitivity have difficulty selecting and attending to important input and filtering out that background input. Another example of sensory sensitivity could be a child may be very aware of smells in the room. And so if I wear a strong perfume during my session, they might have difficulty attending to the activity because they're more focused on the smell of my perfume than the actual activity. And then getting into sensory avoiding, which was what the question was about, if it's related to touch. Sensory avoiding is the active response to having a low threshold. So similarly, kids with sensitivity who are considered sensory avoiding, they might have difficulty filtering out the background sensory input, but they'll actively avoid situations where they experience this overload of input. So for example, a child who is sensory avoiding to touch input, they might avoid finger painting or messy play, and they'll try to use a paintbrush or even a staff member's hand or a parent's hand to interact with the paint or messy textures. So it's definitely possible to be avoiding with touch input. Other things that we'll kind of get into a little bit more when we actually talk about the touch is different ways that kids will be sensory avoiding. So we'll talk more about that as well in future slides.
So yeah, we're going to break it down now into each system. So we're going to talk about the 8 senses, break everything down, give you guys a nice chart for each of the senses that you can refer back to when the presentation goes out for you guys to have. Okay, so usually we do some kind of fun lab and movement in these in these presentations just to help us better remember everything. But since it's virtual, that can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to give you guys some examples kind of at the end of each of the senses that we talk about, so you can kind of relate it back to yourself. So if someone is avoiding in touch or is like very sensitive to touch, this may present as someone who doesn't like to be touched, being quote unquote a picky eater and refusing to eat certain textured foods. Certain clothing material may be really bothersome and they may avoid getting dirty. So some things that we can do to help if someone is avoiding touch or very sensitive, wearing clothes that maybe don't have the tags or are seamless now that different clothing companies are making more, I would say, touch-friendly clothes. That might be an option. Chewing on ice before mealtime. This is a way they kind of diminish the senses in the taste buds on the tongue, and can help reduce that new food, or even just a preferred food that maybe has a really intense taste to it. It can reduce that. Deep pressure massage, so a lot of squeezes and input that way. Sensory bags. So we've heard of maybe sensory bins where you have bins of rice or bins of beans and kids can play in them. But if someone is avoiding, maybe they would like a sensory bag. So just putting all of those items, either having like a rice bag or a bag of paint, and we could play with things that way. So you could still have some of that texture and feel, but it's not as messy or as much input as a bin might be. And then reducing the need to touch things with hands. So kind of similar to the bags and what Molly had said before, like for painting, using a paintbrush or a sponge or something to reduce the need to touch the paint with their hands. And then on the opposite end, there's seeking and low registration. So these kiddos are wanting a lot of touch, a lot of input this way. So this could present as maybe not noticing when they're dirty or injured, holding a fidget, so playing with items in their hands, or kind of wanting to touch different objects, people. I see this a lot in my clinic. There's kids, being pushed in one of the little wheel cars, and they're constantly touching like the different things on the walls. We have a lot of fun things on the walls for kids to touch. So these kids are sensory seeking and wanting that touch. So some strategies that we can use if kids are really seeking out this input are having access to sensory bins, engaging in messy play, having a lot of different fidgets. Playing outside is a great way to incorporate a lot of touch. There's a lot of different textures outside, especially like on the playground. There's mulch, grass, metal objects like slides, a lot of different things that kids can touch and play with. You might want to include touch when learning something new. So for example, drawing in OT, we like to work on the alphabet. So we may use sand to help the kids like draw the alphabet, say like letter A in the sand, and then maybe we do it on paper after that, just to incorporate more of that tactile touch input. Another example could be wearing tight clothing. So tight clothing can give them just that extra sense of touch and input. So an example for you guys, just to think about while you're at home, or to notice the clothes on your body. Are you wearing clothes that you just came home like from work in? Are they comfortable? Are they tight? Are they itchy? Just noticing how those clothes feel on your body. So maybe if you're feeling a little bit sensitive and you're still in those work clothes, like it might be uncomfortable and you're really looking forward to changing into sweatpants and a loose fitting t-shirt. If you are seeking out different input, maybe you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt and now you're sitting in the air conditioning and it's really cold. So you want to go grab, a warm, comfy sweatshirt. and have that fuzzy sweatshirt that you can touch and wear. So those are just some examples you can think about and relating it back to yourself. Okay, so the next sense we're going to talk about is sight. So if someone is avoiding or sensitive, they're going to have a lot of light sensitivity, maybe poor visual tracking, which just means your ability to follow a moving object. Maybe these kiddos get a lot of headaches or close their eyes frequently. So some strategies we can use to help these kiddos would be to dim the lights, maybe just having, I mean, in our clinic, there's a lot of fluorescent lighting. So anytime we can go into maybe one of the smaller rooms and turn down those lights or use a different kind of light can be really helpful for kids. Just taking a break from visual stimuli. So there can be a lot going on at the centers. There's a lot of pictures on the walls and things like that. So just taking a break, sitting in a dark area or on the beanbag, closing their eyes and just taking a break from all of that visual input. Maybe we could reduce the number of pictures or items in their environment. Having a clean desk is really beneficial for some kids, so they don't have as much to look at. You would also reduce the number of pictures on a choice board. So say they have either a visual schedule or just like a board of items that they like to choose from. If there's like 20 options on there, that's a lot to look through, and that can be a little bit overwhelming. So maybe putting 4 or 5 pictures on there, reducing the number of items they have to look through so they can tell you what they would like to do. And on the opposite end of this, you have kids who are seeking and really like this visual input. So this may present as being really interested in light patterns, attracted to screens. There's a lot of movements and colors on screens, and then enjoying looking through different filters. So some strategies we can use for these kiddos would be just incorporating a lot of visual input into whatever we're doing. So this could be light up toys, things that make music and light up, fidget spinners, playing with sensory bottles, having a lot of patterned clothing or looking at different patterns, I Spy games, looking through kaleidoscopes, maybe looking at mirrors, making silly faces in the mirrors, and or maybe even like the camera, making silly faces in your computer screen camera. So an example that maybe you could do right now just at home is just notice where you're at. What's in your environment? What are you looking at? Is it distracting? Is it calming? Like for me, I'm sitting at my husband's desk. There's a lot of stuff on the table and it's a little bit overwhelming for me. So this would be a little bit distracting if I was working from home. But just take a look and think about that and relate it back to yourself. Okay, the next sense is sound. So if a kiddo is avoiding or very sensitive to sound, this could present as having the difficulty filtering out background noise. It may be that they're very in tune and aware of what's happening in their backgrounds. So they're noticing a lot of little noises that maybe our brains could just block out. Becoming really startled at loud or unexpected noises. They could, benefit from a quiet environment. You may see these kiddos wearing headphones, or maybe they talk really quietly because they can hear, their voice when they speak and they would like it to be lower. So some strategies we can use with these kiddos would be to try and work in a quiet environment if possible. I know some of our centers, like mine, it can be really loud. So even if they need time to like go up in the front in the lobby or take a break, maybe in the staff room where it's quieter, just giving them a little bit of time to relax in that quiet environment. And then if there is going to be a loud noise and you know about it, giving a warning is always helpful. And then offering headphones can be helpful as well. So if someone is on the opposite end of the spectrum and is really wanting a lot of this input and is seeking it out, you might see kids generating their own noises and seeking out loud noises because they really like that auditory input. I mean, they maybe wants to talk loudly, and they could also have difficulty concentrating kind of in the opposite, in a quiet environment. They like to work with music and friends talking in the background kind of thing. So some strategies we can use for these kiddos would be to maybe use musical instruments and incorporate that into our play, singing songs, having books that make music, maybe playing music for the kids while we work. So let's take a moment to just listen to what's happening in your environment. What do you hear? Do you hear your kids in the background? Maybe you're outside and you hear like birds or the lawnmower. So our brain can filter out a lot of this information if it's not important to what we're trying to focus on. So for example, I can hear the air conditioning in my apartment, but really I didn't notice it until I started talking about what's going on in my environment, because I don't really need to know that that's going on. But for some of our avoiding kiddos, they would immediately notice that sound and it would be very distracting. So just take a moment, figure out what's going on in your environment and see if you noticed it before or if you're just noticing it now. All right, Molly is going to take the rest from here.
I am definitely hearing some crickets outside that I did not notice before. Okay, so now I'll talk about taste and smell. And so taste and smell are very highly intertwined. And so we tend to look at these systems together. Smell provides us with more information when we're eating so that we can taste food with more detail. So a great example of this is when we have a head cold, it's harder for us to taste the food we're eating. And our taste sense is dulled because our smell is dulled. So smell is also intertwined with memory. I'm sure everyone has certain memories that are associated with a specific smell. For example, when I smell a specific scent of dish soap, I remember my first apartment because it's the dish soap that I used when I moved out on my own. So I'm sure you all can think of something similar to that, as when you smell it, you can think exactly where you've smelled it before. So that's kind of why we look at taste and smell together. And so we can move on to the next slide to talk about the different strategies. So when children are avoiding or sensitive to taste and smell, they might be a picky eater. They might prefer bland foods. It's really common for kids with autism to prefer bland or starchy foods because the taste is more consistent than fruit or vegetables. You might bite into a raspberry that's sweet, but then the next one could be tart or sour. So bland and starchy foods like pasta or chicken nuggets are more predictable. And so that might be a reason why some kids who are avoiding or sensitive to taste and smell prefer those foods. These kids might also avoid strong scents, and they might have difficulty tolerating toothbrushing because of the input that they're getting in their mouth. So strategies to promote the regulation for this hypersensitivity would be to avoid strong scents. So looking at maybe deodorants without scents, or not wearing perfumes around kids, providing reinforcement for trying new foods, especially with foods that they already like. That could help them try new foods and be more open. And then using a soft toothbrush to decrease the amount of input that they're getting in their mouth during toothbrushing. Then when you have kids who are seeking out taste and smell, or might have low registration of taste and smell, these kids might enjoy spicy and sour foods. They might exhibit frequent drooling. They might mouth inedible objects, or they might bite down on the toothbrush because they're seeking out that oral input. And so some strategies to promote sensory regulation for this hyposensitivity would be using a Z vibe. So this is a vibrating Nuke brush, it's pretty much just like a vibrating tool that you put inside your mouth, and you can go on the insides of your cheeks, on your tongue, on your teeth. It's similar to an electric toothbrush, and which is another strategy. Eating crunchy and chewy snacks. So that provides a lot of input in the mouth because it requires more muscles to be used to crunch down and bite down on those snacks. Diffusing essential oils in the background can provide that smell input, similar to scratch and sniff activities or scented markers. And then imitating faces in the mirror can just help promote some input into the mouth muscles and provide some more input that they might be seeking in that area. So next we'll talk about the vestibular system. So this is one of the hidden systems that Maddie briefly touched on at the beginning of this presentation. So the vestibular system is located in the inner ear, with the different parts of the inner ear detecting different types of movement. So the utricle and the saccule detect linear movements of the head, and then the relative position of the head. So are we upside down or right side up? The semicircular canals detect the angular movements of the head, so moving in circles and in the diagonal type planes. And then all of them together provide a person with a sense of balance and then spatial orientation. And so on this side, we'll talk about the different strategies in the presentations. So when children are more avoiding and sensitive to vestibular input, they might be afraid of movement activities like swinging, going down the slide, or spinning. They might have difficulty climbing stairs. They might appear clumsy, and they might have difficulty learning how to jump. So some strategies that you can do are to help them participate in predictable movements and activities. So providing warnings or visual models during an activity so a child knows what to expect. And then taking each skill one step at a time and learning it slowly can just help a child feel more comfortable and confident in different movement activities. So children who are seeking or might have low registration of vestibular input might enjoy excessive movements. They might be moving really fast and never sitting still. These are the kids running back and forth across the room all the time and never getting tired. They might take climbing risks, and they probably enjoy to be upside down. And so some strategies that and activities that you can use with kids who are seeking out this information or in the sensory input could be going on a swing and doing wheelbarrow walks where they're upside down, walking on their hands while you're holding their feet. Building an obstacle course, spinning activities, and ring around the rosy, and then bouncing on a therapy ball could all be great activities to promote that vestibular input. The next system is the proprioceptive system. And so this is another one of those hidden systems, or this hidden sense. This system is located in our muscles, joints, and tendons, and it provides information about where our body is in space. So for a moment, I'd like to have us take this moment to just get a better understanding of what proprioception is and how we know that our proprioceptive system is working functionally. So everyone at home, just close your eyes. And now I want you to answer these questions. Are you sitting or standing? How are your legs positioned? Where is your left hand located? Are you slouching or sitting upright? So you can open your eyes. If you were able to answer these questions, that indicates that your proprioceptive system is working. So your brain is able to take in that sensory input from your muscles, joints, and tendons to let your brain know where your body is in space. So other examples to indicate that you have a functional proprioceptive system could be closing your eyes and touching your nose, picking something up and adjusting the strength that you need based on the weight of the object, or walking to the bathroom in the dark in the middle of the night without falling over. Those are all ways that you can tell that your proprioceptive system is working. So kids who are avoiding or sensitive to proprioceptive input might avoid physical contact. They might be timid around physical play, and they might hold objects with really light pressure. So you might see in handwriting activities, they're writing on the paper, but the stroke is too light to even see because they weren't holding the crayon with enough pressure. So some strategies to use could be to provide some warnings about the environment. So when you're walking up the stairs or off a sidewalk, you can say, there's a step right here, you need to step down, so that they don't trip, so that they don't miss that input. Using weighted grips for handwriting activities. This is a pencil grip that just has a weight on it, and it just helps provide more pressure during handwriting activities. And then providing a gradual introduction of deep pressure massage. That's more for like sensory seeking, but if you provide it in a gradual introduction, it helps kids become more comfortable and okay with that input. Then children who are either seeking out proprioceptive input or have low registration of sensory input might stomp their feet while they're walking, might hold objects with excessive force. They might enjoy rough play or body squeezes, and they might stand too close to other people. And so some strategies or activities that you can do for seeking out proprioceptive input could be to have your child wear a compression or a weighted vest. So a compression vest is similar to just tight clothing. It provides more input on their muscles and joints. And then a weighted vest adds that weight, so it adds a little bit of deep pressure. Other things that you can do are heavy weight or heavy work activities, which is just pushing things around to build a fort, carrying groceries in and helping mom and dad to put away the groceries, or carrying a laundry basket, things like that. You can also do wheelbarrow walks. This was one of the strategies for vestibular system as well, but it also works with proprioceptive because it provides that input at your wrists and your shoulders. And then some oral motor activities like chewing on crunchy and chewy snacks provides that proprioceptive input to your teeth. So these are all great strategies for proprioception.
Okay, we made it to our last sense, interoception. And this one can be a little tricky to understand, so I'm going to do my best, but please ask questions in the chat if you have anything that pops up. So the interoception system, it just helps us understand what's going on within our bodies through the receptors inside of our organs. So it kind of just helps us tell the brain, you know, what's going on inside of our body. So you can refer to this picture here, and it breaks down what like different areas in your body that may send different signals to our brain so we understand what's happening. So an example of this would be hunger. And I mean, you can hear your stomach growling, and then that's an audible sense or audible noise that we can hear. But then you can also feel emptiness in your stomach, and that is going up to our brain and telling us, hey, maybe we should go get some food. I think you're feeling kind of hungry. Another example of this could be you are, maybe you're sitting here and you realize you're really cold. And so these senses are telling us, hey, let's go get a jacket. You'll feel more comfortable. And then we can focus a little bit better on what's going on. So some different activities that we can do for this, if someone is avoiding or sensitive to interoception, they're going to have really intense reactions to hunger or needing to use the bathroom. They may have difficulty focusing on external stimuli, and this is because they're so aware and in tune to what is going on inside their body that focusing on anything outside of their body, say, for example, I'm asking them to do a handwriting task, and they're so focused on how hungry they are, they're not going to be able to perform to the best of their ability because they're so focused on how they're feeling on the inside. So maybe if we were to go get a snack and then come back to it later, they would be able to do better on that handwriting task. And then maybe they feel really, really anxious over small problems. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if someone is seeking or has that low registration, their interoception system maybe isn't working as quote unquote normal. So this can mean that they have a really high pain tolerance, and For example, if I bump into the corner of the desk, I might feel that as pain and kind of stop and register that. But if someone is having that low registration and they bump into the side of the table, they could just keep running and really not even notice that it happened. So a lot of these kids have a lot of cuts and bruises and don't even know how they got half of them. Maybe they're late to toilet training because that sense of, hey, I need to go use the bathroom is not very strong. So noticing that can be a little bit tricky, and that we need to work. We can help train to understand those feelings and learn, how to respond to our body when we need to go to the bathroom. And that's something that we work on in ABA and in OT quite frequently. Maybe these kiddos don't feel as hungry. They just don't have that intense reaction to hunger and may need cues to be reminded to go eat, take a break, have a snack. And then maybe they don't react to temperature, need reminders for a jacket or to put on shorts because it's really hot outside. So I kind of talked about some of the strategies as I was talking through these, avoiding and seeking differences, but again, just providing like daily schedules for bathrooms, breaks, snack times, and just having access to that food and water can really be helpful for kids who, maybe are avoiding or seeking in either area. For older kids, if it's possible, we could do like a map my feelings worksheet and just learning, how is your body feeling in this moment, taking a minute to realize what's going on and taking that pause and that break to understand how we're feeling. Yoga and mindfulness are really helpful, especially with some of our older kiddos, to just slow down and take a break and realize what's going on. And then as an adult, we can kind of help label and identify feelings as much as possible. And then this could look like if you hear your kid's stomach growl and they have, that they haven't really eaten all day because they've just been so busy playing that they kind of forgot that they needed to eat. You could help them identify, hey, I just heard your stomach growl. Maybe you're feeling hungry right now. Should we go get a snack? And then the kiddo can kind of process that and think about it and then identify, if they want to go get a snack. Another example could be you stub your toe. You may be able to explain to your child how that feels, or maybe explain it to them if they were to stub their toe, like, oh, it feels warm, or maybe that's painful and it hurts, and just give them some words to help describe how they're feeling. So right now, if you can just think about, how are you feeling? Are you feeling hungry? Did you eat dinner before this presentation? Or are you like, please, can you just finish because I need to go eat dinner? I'm so hungry right now. I can barely focus on what you're saying. So our bodies are able to give us those signals and tell us, so that when our body and all of our signals and our needs are met, we can focus on what it is we need to do. So unfortunately, the sound is not going to work for this video either, but the name of it is Sesame Street, Name That Emotion with Murray. And this is another great strategy and, activity you could do with your kids. And it's kind of fun because most kids like Sesame Street, but basically Murray is this like orange Muppet here, and he asks different characters from Sesame Street to explain how they're feeling. And it gives kids that language to express maybe how they're feeling. So the first little Muppet in this video is feeling really happy, and the chicken, it's a chicken, explains that it just laid an egg and it's like so exciting, and he's just like overjoyed and can't stop smiling. And then it asks the viewers to name that emotion, and then we would say, oh, you're feeling happy, and it goes on throughout the video. So definitely take a minute to watch it later, show your kids. It's a really cute video.
Do you know?
Okay.
Wait, I could hear that.
Oh, you could?
Yeah.
Yes,
don't
I could too. It was like magic.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Wait, can
Well,
you go back?
I know. How
Other
do we
people
do that?
confirm. So if you want to play it, maybe now.
Okay, let me just exit out.
Magical. Sorry.
Oh, that was
Okay.
amazing.
Well, somehow it wants to work for us.
Zoom loves Sesame Street, I think.
No, it's not. Okay. Let's see. Can you guys see it? Am I back? Okay.
Do
you
you
hear
know
it?
a lot about emotions and
Right.
feelings? Great. Then you're ready to play game. In this game, we have to figure out what feeling our contestants are feeling. Ready to play? Great. Ovejita, bring in the first contestant. See who it is. Chicken. It's Chicken. Can you describe a little bit about how you're feeling?
I'll try, Murray. Well, it's a really good feeling. I laid this egg and I just can't stop smiling.
It's a really good feeling, and she can't stop smiling. Feeling is the chicken feeling. See? Do you think the chicken is happy? Let's find out. Where's Chicken? Are you happy?
Well, as a matter of fact, Murray, I am happy.
All right, so it goes on for a few more minutes there, and feel free to watch it, but it's a great way to interact with your kids and talk about emotions and make it kind of fun.
Do you know a lot about?
All right, so this is pretty much all we talked about with all the different senses, and we put it in a table format so you can have this as a reference to refer to. Obviously, there's a lot of activities that we did not include, but that could be included in all of these different strategies. The list can go on and on, but hopefully this gives you guys a good starting point on what you could do with your child to help incorporate these sensory strategies into play at home in different environments. So if you guys have questions or want to collaborate more on any of these areas, feel free to reach out to me if I'm your child's OT, or any of the OTs in any other center would be more than happy to talk more about all of these different sensory strategies. And then Molly is going to close it out and we'll answer questions at the end.
Okay, so there are just a few key takeaways that we hope you learned from our presentation. So the first one is that there are 8 sensory systems, not just the main 5 that everybody knows. And now you have a fun fact to share with your friends who might not know that it's more than just the touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. The vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoception systems are the hidden senses, and they play a huge role in our sensory processing and regulation. The second key takeaway is that sensory input might impact children differently. I'm sure you have heard the quote, when you meet a person with autism, you meet one person with autism. And that just means that every child with autism is different and unique. Similarly, we all respond to sensory input differently. And so there's really no one size fits all with sensory processing and regulation. The third takeaway is that a child may be sensory seeking in one type of input and avoiding in another type of input. It'd be really nice if we could all say, I'm sensory seeking or I'm sensory input, but the reality is that a child could have responses in all 4 quadrants of that visual that we showed earlier. And so it's very possible that a child might avoid sound input, they might seek out vestibular input, they might have low registration for touch input, and they might be sensitive to smell. So every child's different, like I said, and you can have one in each of the different types of responses. The fourth takeaway is that activities that incorporate more than one type of sensory input promote sensory regulation skills. So on the previous slide, we provided examples of activities that fall under each sensory system. And so the best activities are the ones that involve multiple senses. So a great example is an obstacle course. You can provide vestibular input by going down a slide. You can provide proprioceptive input by jumping on floor dots. touch input by crawling on the floor and picking up spiky bean bags, and visual input by giving them a bucket of toys and telling them to find the yellow block. And so every activity that we do with our children, whether we realize it or not, involves multiple sensory systems. So I promise it's not as hard as it seems. And like Maddie said, the OT at your center is more than willing to help you come up with some amazing sensory-based activities. And the last key takeaway that we would hope for you to get from this presentation is to just promote play through fun-based sensory activities. Like Maddie said at the beginning of this presentation, play is a child's main occupation. And when we are providing these fun sensory-based activities, we're promoting development of play skills. And so this provides opportunities for them to gain independence in their main occupation. And so that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. We hope that you all enjoyed it.